Your fawning response from your complex childhood, your complex PTSD childhood, is getting in the way of you choosing and finding and keeping healthy people in your life. Really quickly, what is the fawn response? It's one of the many trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, you've probably heard of, also called please and appease. And a few more we talk about, less talked about, one called collapse and submit, which is kind of a level below, even deeper than freeze. And one called attach, cry out for help. I've made a bunch of videos on these, so please feel free to check those out. But here's the thing. This trauma response called fawn, or please and appease, as Pete Walker says, it is a response to a threat by becoming more appealing to the threat. Basically what we're doing is trying to find a way to minimize the danger for ourselves. And I think this is extremely common in really any form of childhood complicated trauma situation, where we learn that the best thing for us to do is for it to not be about us, for us to hyperfixate, be hypervigilant, to rotate around the caregiver in whatever way we need to. Now, it might be hypervigilance, as I've talked about in so many videos, because the parents are unpredictable and ragey and chaotic. And it might be because they were neglectful and absent, and you had to make sure when they did show up that you got your basic needs met in some way. They got the groceries you needed or whatever. Like, it can be for lots of reasons. But this response is really about the core of self-abandonment. It is about saying, I don't need to have needs and exist, but I only have them in response to you getting your needs met, right? So I exist in response to you, not in spite or as a separate part of you in our story in terms of like parents, let's say. And so what happens when we're dating, and this is really the issue, is we often create these, or engage in, I should say, these fawning behaviors, and we're going to go through them and talk about how they affect the people you choose. Now, I said dating, but it could be friendships, partners, whatever. And in fact, I do want to expand this to just in general relationships. Number one, we suppress our own needs. So we show up in relationships not having them. And what kinds of people are going to be especially happy that we have no needs? And I kind of hesitate to say this, but it's going to be narcissistic people, selfish people, those who lack emotional intelligence, those who don't have a benefit in you being an equal partner, those who live in a world where there's a power hierarchy and where you don't matter. Now, I know in certain environments, like work, for example, you don't necessarily get to just like announce all of your needs. There is a hierarchy. So I'm talking about in relationships in general, but there is a place even at work where you might be truly not even self-advocating for what you want and need and deserve, your pay, your hours, your effort, your time, because you have this fawning response of basically suppressing your own needs. Number two, you don't really know how to authentically show up as yourself, right? You're like a chameleon. You become so good at reflecting back what others want to see from you that you don't really know who you are. And when you try to engage in your own self-expression, it can feel really uncomfortable. And so you're not showing up as who you really are. And over time, the relationship plays out. And the problem is that you weren't really fully there to begin with because you didn't know how to be. The next one is you trying to fly under the radar. And so you're always just like looming in the background, right? You don't make yourself, your body present and known. And so you show up in these relationships where you're like kind of maybe asking for what you want, but not really, or you're passive aggressive about it, but you don't know how to fully like engage in the world where you're your whole, separate self. You often don't know how to say no. And this is a huge issue around boundaries. So you have a hard time setting boundaries, not only like imagining what those are, but expressing them. And a lot of it is because for so many of us, especially with fawning, conflict in our homes was unsafe, or there was a clear hierarchy between parent and child. It was like, my generation, kids are seen and not heard, or if you want something to cry, I'll give you something to cry about. Don't express what you need, right? Don't set boundaries and all of that. And so a lot of it is you don't necessarily know how to operate in the world where your feelings, your needs, your desires matter. And then even imagining expressing that, it's terrifying. The idea of communicating it is terrifying because you didn't get the practice and the skill set of self-advocating you spent your childhood, as I said the other day, scanning, protecting, and surviving. The next one is over apologizing and always saying you're sorry. And one of my favorite examples of this is an interview with Taylor Swift a few years ago where she's talking about this tendency, especially for women, to apologize, but this can be for anyone. And she says something like, I'm sorry, was I too loud in my own house that I paid for with my own money that I created because I wrote my own songs? Like, it's like, yes, exactly. And so we just kind of go through the world. It's like a bumper car. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And there's a place to say that, but I think it takes real skill to practice that. It's almost like you're apologizing for existing. And when you've been a child of fawning, when you had to fawn, that's kind of what it was. It wasn't about you. And so you might actually feel guilty for existing. So that's a whole other therapeutic issue to talk to your therapist or read about, but important to look at how often you say that and do that. And if you need to say you're sorry, then you should do it. The other thing is people that don't know how to apologize and make repairs, I think those are even bigger problems than never saying you're sorry or saying it too much. Than saying it too much. So there's a place for I'm sorry, but there's also a place for too much I'm sorry. The next one is holding back your thoughts and preferences on things that don't seem acceptable in your environment. So as I was discussing in a video I made about, do you kind of know who you are? If you say you're this one thing, you're this belief, this political party, this religion, this whatever, and yet, or you just believe you're this kind of person, and yet you go out in the world and you don't express that, for some reasons that makes sense. Like I've said, I don't publicly express certain things because A, I'm too soft to deal with it, and B, I want to protect my family and make safe decisions without exposing things, to be honest, that I had never even been online like this until the last few years, not even really on Facebook. So it was really scary for me to put myself out there. So in some places, you don't have to share what you believe about everything. But if the people closest to you don't know what you believe, or if you're afraid to speak your mind with your friends because you're scared to disagree, that's fine. But I would challenge you, like, are these really still your people? If you've evolved and they haven't, for example, right? So what you choose to share or not is your decision. But when we're talking about fawning and adding people to our lives, we're often, once again, just giving them what they want. So we go to dinner with our friends, we say they're our friends, and then we go home and complain, like, can you believe they believe this about this political situation or whatever? It's like, okay, if they're not your friends, it's a business dinner, whatever, fine. But at the end of the day, how much are you showing up as what, as kind of like who you are? The next one is experiencing a lot of chronic illnesses, mental and physical health issues. So we know that childhood trauma is directly related to or correlated to long-term chronic health issues. We know that there's an impact on our bodies when we are exposed to trauma, and that those types of things can play out in things like cancer, diabetes, IBS, fibromyalgia, maternal mental health issues, risk of traumatic brain injury, teenage pregnancy, like all kinds of things. And so that's important. So basically you've turned all your feelings inward, right? You're so busy fawning that you're often neglecting yourself. And that can also be that you just don't focus on self-care at all because it doesn't feel like you're allowed to have self-care. So you don't go to the doctor, you don't go to the dentist, you minimize things that are good for you, you don't take care of your body, whatever, you don't get enough sleep or focus on, things that make you feel better. Obviously, you can tend to, because of your kind of compulsive, like making it about others, you might take on others' responsibilities. So you own things that don't belong to you. You apologize, you take responsibility for things that really aren't your fault. And in that sense, you're really good at that because you would learn to protect the parent from their own, reality of what they were doing. You took the hit. And so you keep doing that. The next thing is you tend to think that you're, as a result of your childhood fawning and you're so good at compulsive caretaking and people pleasing, that you think it's your job to fix everyone. And even in this field, as a therapist, a psychologist, there's only so much we can do, and it is your journey to work on. And so it's not about, I don't think, did you do the homework or not, but it's about what are you doing to evolve and change. And even then, many of us feel like, oh, this patient's not making progress, or oh, they're going over here, whatever it is. And there's a place where it can, of course, align with us, but a 1 hour or 45-minute session a week, the rest of the week is up to you. And so I think that's hard, and it takes, growth is slow. I don't know who thought that in 12 sessions you could change something, I guess insurance, but I know I've been in therapy for years, and there are things that I kind of got too quickly and things that I have really had to have the same therapy session, my poor therapist, over and over again until I finally got it. So, growth is a process. It's not easy to change this. But anyway, it's not your job to rescue or fix others. Even if that's your job, even if you're an ER doctor or whatever you are, right? There's only so much that you can do. The next thing is attempting to control others' choices. And so you're trying to manage others to manage your own emotional dysregulation or safety issues. And so you're putting yourself in front of other people's, like I was saying before, their responsibilities, their dynamics, their behaviors, because you're trying to protect yourself or them from something, but really it's more about them. You're not really in the equation. You often deny your own needs, your own comfort, discomfort, I'm fine, things like that. You don't speak up for, if you get the wrong meal, if you got the wrong hotel room, whatever it is. And look, these things are really scary and hard, I know. But at the same time, you just continually tell yourself, because you never speak up, that you don't matter. And so you deny even your own pain. Maybe you ignore that tooth that's been hurting for months, or you walk around limping and you think, I don't know what's going on with that. So that's important. You basically, at the end of the day, you're molding and changing yourself again and again and again. You're like shape shifting to be what other people need from you or what you think they need from you. And that fawning behavior that you mastered so well in childhood that you needed to master is now hurting you in relationships because you're not showing up and you don't even necessarily know how to begin to honor yourself. So what can you do? And this is a much bigger issue, but try to look at your role in things. Where do you feel resentment about things? I believe resentment is a huge way to determine where we feel like we need more boundaries. So if we're taking too much, we're often resentful. How do you manage your emotions and feelings? Where do you think that you cross the line? This is challenging yourself into other people's worlds. Where do you deny and minimize your own needs? How can you learn to validate? And that's probably a whole other video. How to learn to validate yourself, to say, you know what? This is like a normal expected response for most people. I'm entitled to feel blah, blah, blah. I struggle with this one a lot. It's like, no, that's actually okay. You're allowed to be mad about that. You're allowed to set a boundary. You're allowed to say no. So practicing to do that. Obviously, you want to work on creating, trying to seek out people that also aren't just cool with you, just like not being your full self. I have said this, and I'm sure there's lots of reasons for it, but I don't enjoy meeting with people that I'm supposed to know well and discussing super surface topics where we don't discuss our families, we don't discuss the politics, we don't discuss religion, we don't discuss what our kids are struggling with, we don't discuss what we're struggling with. It's just like superficial BS. Like, I hate it. And it's made it hard for me with mom friends because I'm also a very private person. Although, like I said in another video, I trauma dumped in the beginning too much, which that was a whole other thing. But basically, I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. And we can talk about my brain and all the other things and why I might be that way. But I'm not good at faking it. I'm terrible at networking, which is a huge reason why I also started making videos. Like, I knew that I could share my passion with people this way, of course, alone. But I would go to networking events in the beginning when I went back to get my doctorate. And I would be so overcome with social anxiety and panic that I would leave. Like, it was really hard for me. So if I could get through a whole event and maybe get a few cards, like, that was great. I felt fake. I didn't feel comfortable. And it was really stressful for me. And it wasn't just my own anxiety and social anxiety, because I was a really shy child, which I know probably seems weird for me to say that now. Not even that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, I'd have a panic having to make a phone call. Probably more in my 20s, well, maybe my 30s. Making phone calls was really stressful. Now, of course, no one makes phone calls, so it's fine. But the point is that, it can be difficult to overcome these parts of our lives. And of course, there were probably things like lingering shame and comparison and inner critic and all of that were showing up with me to those events. So I found another way, right? So part of it is like figuring out how you can value yourself and honor the strengths that you have, but that still make it about you and not forcing yourself. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And it ended up being okay, right? So that's important. You want to just start to lean into every time you make a decision about something, like, is this something I really want, or am I doing this to get some kind of like attaboy from somebody else, right? Am I getting a praise? Am I getting rewarded? And sometimes we have to make things about other people. There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of reciprocity. I take and give and you take and give. So it's not about ever sacrificing. There are times to be there for our partners, our kids, for others when it's not about us. This isn't about the alternative being selfishness, and it's just about you're allowed to also be self-focused, as I was talking about in a few videos ago. It doesn't make you selfish, you know? So I would ask you, you know, to look at those fawning behaviors, to have compassion for yourself. They probably make you a great caretaker and a great listener. There are some beautiful strengths to that, but you deserve to be in the conversation, in the equation, and in the relationship. You, for exactly who you are worthy of that. So, thank you for being here. Please stay safe and well. Bye.